What's the most rebellious thing you did as a teenager? In my family, there was one rule. I needed my twins' permission to seek medical help. I was watching Vanessa practice her birthday speech when my lungs seized up. I reached for my inhaler on the coffee table, but Mom snatched it away. Vanessa, does Ellie need this? My twin didn't even look up from her phone. She used it at lunch. She's fine. You heard your sister. Mom dropped my inhaler in her purse. No attention seeking today. It's Vanessa's sweet 16th. The rule had been in place since we were 12. The day I faked pneumonia during Vanessa's ballet recital. I hadn't faked it, but Vanessa said I had. So that became the truth. From then on, every headache, every fever, every asthma attack had to be verified by the golden twin. Can't breathe. The wheeze was starting. That whistling sound my doctor called your body's alarm bell. Ellie! Dad's voice boomed from the doorway. What do we do when you claim you're sick? I knew the script. Ask Vanessa first. And what did Vanessa say? Vanessa finally looked up, annoyed. I said she's fine. Gosh, Ellie, do you have to make my day about you? My chest was tightening like someone was sitting on it. Each breath felt like sucking air through a coffee stirrer. Please, I gasped. Need hospital. Mom! Vanessa whined. She's doing it again. Make her stop. Mom rushed to comfort Vanessa. Don't worry, sweetie. Ellie, go to your room if you're going to act like this. The modeling scout will be here soon. I tried to stand but had to grip the couch. My fingernails were starting to tinge blue. Look. I held up my hands. Vanessa laughed. She probably painted them blue. Remember when she faked passing out at my recital? I hadn't faked it. I'd had an asthma attack, but Vanessa told everyone I was jealous, so my parents refused to leave her performance. The doorbell rang. Party guests started to arrive. Ellie, disappear, Dad ordered. Vanessa's modeling scout is coming. We don't need you wheezing in the background. I couldn't move. My lungs were working overtime, visible through my shirt. Every breath was a battle I was losing. Mom, please, I need hospital. Vanessa, Mom called out sweetly. Your sister's asking for the hospital. What do you think? Vanessa. She stood directly in front of me, blocking my parents' view. For a second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. She's faking, Vanessa announced loudly. She's just mad Ted's coming. Ted, my childhood friend who Vanessa stole just because she could. I knew it, Mom shouted. Ellie, stop this immediately! That's when I started coughing blood. Vanessa's best friend Jenny walked in and froze. Oh my gosh, what's wrong with Ellie? Nothing, Vanessa said quickly. She's being dramatic. Vanessa, she's coughing blood. No, they're not. Vanessa stepped in front of me again. Everything's perfect. Go help with decorations. But Jenny was pre-med. She pushed past Vanessa and grabbed my wrist. Her pulse is racing. This is a medical emergency. We don't do medical emergencies without Vanessa's approval, Dad said, like it was totally normal. House rules. What? Jenny looked horrified. Vanessa knows Ellie best, Mom explained. She can tell when Ellie's really sick versus performing. Performing? Jenny was already dialing 911. She's in respiratory failure. Give me that phone. Dad lunged for it. Mr. Lit, with all due respect, your daughter is dying. Vanessa? Mom turned desperately to my twin. Is Ellie dying? Vanessa hesitated. The spotlight was off her, on her birthday, because of me. Again. No, Vanessa said firmly. She's not dying. She does this every time something important happens to me. That's when I stopped breathing entirely. The silence was immediate. Ellie? Vanessa's voice wavered slightly. Stop it. People are arriving. Vanessa, she's not breathing, Jenny screamed. She's holding her breath, Vanessa insisted, but her voice cracked. She's really committed to ruining my party. I fell forward off the couch. The impact when I hit the floor should have hurt, but I couldn't feel anything anymore. Call 911. Jenny was doing chest compressions. Now! But Vanessa said, Mom started. I don't care what Vanessa said. More guests were arriving. I could hear screams, commotion. Someone was yelling about finding my inhaler. This is Ellie's fault, Vanessa was sobbing. She always does this. Always. Your sister is dying, Jenny screamed. Help me. Dad tried to pull Jenny away. Vanessa said she's fine. Through the fading darkness, I heard Ted's voice. Mr. Lit. What are you doing? She's blue. She's actually blue. The last thing I heard was Vanessa screaming, You're supposed to be on my side. I woke up 3 days later in the ICU. The doctor said I'd been clinically dead for 4 minutes. 4 minutes where my parents waited for Vanessa's permission to save me. My parents couldn't look at me. They just kept saying, Vanessa said you were fine, over and over. But Jenny knew the truth. Ted knew. Every guest at that party knew. And we were going to destroy them. The machines around my bed kept beeping in steady rhythm when I opened my eyes again and found the doctor standing there with his clipboard and this real serious look on his face. He pulled up a chair next to my bed and started explaining how my respiratory failure had been. So bad that my heart actually stopped for 4 whole minutes. And those 4 minutes without oxygen meant they needed to watch me super carefully for any lasting damage to my brain or other organs. His pen moved across the papers as he wrote down my responses to his questions about whether I could feel my fingers and toes and remember my birthday and count backwards from 10. The doctor then mentioned something that made my chest tighten in a different way when he said the hospital had already flagged my case to Child Protective Services because multiple witnesses at the party reported my parents refusing to let anyone call for medical help even when I was dying. He explained that someone from CPS would come talk to me once I was more stable, but that the hospital was required by law to report what happened since it looked like medical neglect. My parents showed up about an hour later, and Mom immediately started crying these big dramatic tears about how worried she'd been, while Dad kept saying over and over that they thought I was just being dramatic like I always was during Vanessa's important events. They wanted to take me home right away, but the doctor stepped in and told them firmly that I needed at least another week of observation, given how severe my cardiac arrest had been, and the potential for complications. After the doctor left to check on other patients, I pressed the call button, and when the nurse came in, I told her everything about the rule that had been in place since I was 12, where I needed Vanessa's permission for any medical care, including using my inhaler or going to the doctor. Her eyes went super wide and she grabbed her notepad and started writing down everything I said. while asking me to repeat certain parts, and she kept shaking her head and muttering that she needed to add all of this to my official medical file immediately. The next day, Jenny and Ted showed up together, and they both sat on either side of my bed promising they would give official statements about everything they saw at the party. Jenny pulled out this notebook where she'd written down all my vital signs from before the ambulance arrived using the medical knowledge from her pre-med classes. And Ted showed me his phone where he'd actually recorded some of what happened, including my dad trying to physically stop Jenny from calling 911. 2 days later, a woman named Gabriela Reyes from CPS came to interview me, and she was really gentle but super thorough in her questions about the medical permission rule and how long it had been going on. She took photos of all the old scars on my arms from untreated allergic reactions that had gotten infected, and wrote down every single incident I could remember where Vanessa had denied me medical care for things like strep throat and a broken finger and severe food poisoning. The next morning, Dr. Arthur Keller, who was a lung specialist, came to evaluate my asthma, and spent over an hour teaching me how to create a detailed action plan that didn't need anyone's permission but mine to follow. He showed me the right way to use my inhaler with a spacer, and gave me this device called a peak flow meter that would let me track my breathing every single day, so I could catch problems before they got dangerous. My parents came back to visit again 2 days later, and this time they pressured me hard to tell everyone I had exaggerated what happened, and that our family didn't need this kind of attention from CPS or the police. I had my phone hidden under my blanket recording everything as Dad leaned in close and said they would make my life absolutely miserable if I didn't stop cooperating with the investigation and come home like nothing happened. While I was stuck in the hospital bed, I scrolled through social media and saw that Vanessa had posted dozens of photos from her Sweet 16 party, acting like nothing had happened with captions about the best night ever and her amazing modeling scout meeting. The comments were split between people asking if I was okay, since they'd heard I'd been taken away in an ambulance, and others who believed her story that I was just faking to get attention on her special day. And seeing those perfect curated images while I had IV lines in my arms and oxygen monitors on my fingers made me feel physically sick. Jenny spent hours at the hospital writing out this super detailed statement about everything she had witnessed, including all the medical observations about my blue lips and fingernails and how my breathing had completely stopped, and how long it took for my parents to finally let someone call 911. She made copies of everything and gave one to CPS and another to the police detective who had been assigned to investigate what happened. And she told me she would testify in court if needed, because what she saw was criminal neglect that almost killed me. The next morning, Gabriela came back to my hospital room carrying a thick folder and pulled a chair close to my bed. She explained that CPS was putting an emergency safety plan in place, which meant I couldn't go home with my parents until they finished investigating everything. She asked if I had any safe relatives or friends who might be able to take me in for a while. I thought about my aunts and uncles, but they all lived too far away, or had always sided with my parents about Vanessa being perfect. Jenny had been texting me all morning, and when I mentioned needing somewhere to stay, she immediately called her mom, who said yes without even hesitating. Gabriela had to run background checks on Jenny's parents and do a home visit to make sure their house was safe, which took 3 days of paperwork and phone calls. The social worker came to inspect Jenny's house, checking that there was a proper bedroom for me, and asking her parents tons of questions about their work schedules and whether they understood what they were taking on. Once everything got approved, Jenny's dad drove his truck to my parents' house to help me pack my stuff. My parents stood in the doorway watching with these angry looks on their faces while I grabbed clothes and books and my school laptop from my room. Mom kept saying this was all a big misunderstanding, and I should just come home where I belonged, but Gabriela was there making sure they didn't try to stop me from leaving. Dad crossed his arms and told me I was making a huge mistake that would destroy our family, but I just kept packing boxes and carrying them out to the truck. Vanessa watched from her bedroom window upstairs, and I could see her typing on her phone, probably telling everyone her version of what was happening. After we loaded everything, Jenny's mom had already set up the guest room with new sheets and cleared out half the closet for my clothes. The next week, I had to meet with the school counselor, Megan Watson, who had this tiny office filled with motivational posters and a bowl of candy on her desk. She pulled up my class schedule on her computer and started making notes about which teachers needed to know about my situation and what accommodations I would need. She made sure I had permission to carry my inhaler everywhere and could leave any class if I started having breathing problems without needing to ask first. She also set up extended deadlines for all the assignments I'd missed while in the hospital, and arranged for me to eat lunch in her office if the cafeteria felt too overwhelming. Ted texted me that night saying he'd found something I needed to see, and when we met up at the coffee shop near school, he showed me screenshots from 2 years ago. They were messages between him and Vanessa, where she was laughing about how I'd begged her to let me see a doctor for strep throat, and she'd said no just to see how long I'd suffer. She'd written, "It's so funny how she has to ask me permission for everything medical," with laughing emojis, and Ted had saved all of it because even back then something felt wrong to him. He forwarded everything to Gabriela's email while we sat there, and he promised he would testify about what he saw at the party, and these old messages if they needed him to. Dr. Keller scheduled another appointment where he spent over an hour teaching me how to use this peak flow meter properly, showing me how to blow into it 3 times every morning and night, and record the numbers in a special chart. He explained that normal readings for someone my age should be between 380 and 400, but mine were only hitting 250 because of all the damage from untreated attacks over the years. He showed me the zones on the chart, green meaning I was okay, yellow meaning I needed to be careful and maybe use my rescue inhaler, and red meaning I needed to get to the hospital immediately. For the first time in 4 years, I could actually track what was happening in my lungs instead of waiting for Vanessa to decide if I was sick enough. That same day, someone sent me a screenshot from our school group chat, where people were asking if I was okay since they'd heard an ambulance came to Vanessa's party. Vanessa had replied saying I was staying with friends for a bit because I wanted attention, and everyone should stop spreading rumors about our family. A bunch of kids pushed back, saying they'd heard from people at the party that I'd actually stopped breathing and almost died, but Vanessa kept insisting it was all exaggerated and I was fine. She wrote that I'd always been jealous of her, and this was just another attempt to ruin something important to her. Gabriela called me a few days later and asked me to come to the CPS office, where she sat me down in the small room with fluorescent lights and explained how the whole investigation would work. She said they were looking at possible criminal charges against my parents for child endangerment and medical neglect, but warned me it could take months of interviews and court dates. She asked if I was prepared for such a long process, and if I understood that my parents might face jail time, or at least probation, if charges were filed. 2 weeks after leaving the hospital, I finally went back to the school, and walking through those front doors felt like everyone was staring at me and whispering about what had happened. In third period, my chest started getting tight, and I could feel that familiar wheeze starting. But this time, I just pulled out my inhaler and used it right there in class without asking anyone. The attack passed within minutes, and my teacher didn't even question it because Megan had already told all of them about my medical plan. Later that week, a thick envelope arrived at Jenny's house from the hospital, and inside was a copy of all my discharge paperwork, including the nurse's official notes. Reading through the medical terms was weird but validating, seeing words like severe respiratory distress and suspected medical neglect, and Child Protective Services notified due to parents' refusal to seek treatment. The next page had more details about my 4 minutes of cardiac arrest and how Jenny's CPR probably saved my life before the paramedics arrived. At the bottom, the attending physician had written that my parents had shown concerning lack of appropriate response to life-threatening medical emergency and recommended immediate CPS involvement. Then on Friday afternoon, I got an email from the principal saying my parents had requested a meeting to discuss what they called misunderstandings and rumors about our family situation that were affecting Vanessa at the school. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday, and just thinking about sitting in the same room with them while they tried to twist everything around made my stomach hurt. Megan promised she would be there with me and said I didn't have to go if I didn't feel safe, but I knew I needed to face them and tell the truth about what they'd done. 2 days before the meeting, Megan called me into her office after school, and we spent 3 hours going over everything that might happen. She pulled out this thick folder with papers about student rights and started marking sections with sticky notes while explaining how my parents couldn't force me to leave with them or sign anything. She showed me where to sit in the conference room so I'd be closest to the door and wrote down phrases I could use if they started yelling or trying to make me feel guilty. Her hands moved quickly across the papers, highlighting parts about medical autonomy for minors in abuse cases, and she practiced with me how to stay calm by counting my breaths if things got intense. She promised she'd sit right next to me and take notes on everything they said, and if I needed a break, I could just tap her arm twice and we'd leave the room immediately. The next morning, Jenny came to find me before first period and handed me a manila envelope with her official statement inside. I sat on the hallway floor and read through 4 pages of medical terms describing my condition that day, with specific numbers for my pulse rate and breathing patterns she'd observed. She'd written how my lips were cyanotic, and my nail beds showed severe oxygen deprivation, using all the clinical language from her pre-med courses that made everything sound even more serious. At the bottom, she'd signed and dated it, with a note saying she'd already given copies to Gabriella and the detective investigating the case. After chemistry on Wednesday, I was putting my books in my locker when Vanessa appeared behind me and slammed the door shut. She grabbed my wrist and twisted it, demanding I tell everyone I was fine and that the whole thing was blown out of proportion. I tried to pull away, but she dug her nails in deeper, leaving these red marks on my skin while hissing that I was ruining her life over nothing. When I finally yanked my arm free and started walking away, she grabbed my shoulder and spun me around so hard I dropped my books everywhere. Other kids in the hallway stopped to stare as she screamed that I'd always been jealous, and this was just my latest attempt to steal attention from her. I picked up my books without saying anything, and walked straight to the nurse's office, where she photographed the nail marks on my arm and wrote up an incident report. That night, I couldn't stop scrolling through social media, reading comment after comment about the party. Some kids who were there wrote about seeing me on the floor turning blue while my parents just stood there arguing with Jenny instead of helping. Others, mostly Vanessa's friends, posted that I'd always been dramatic and probably planned the whole thing to ruin her birthday. One girl from my English class wrote a long post about how she'd seen me have asthma attacks at the school before, and they were definitely real, not fake like Vanessa claimed. The arguments in the comments got nasty, with people taking sides and sharing screenshots of old posts where Vanessa had mentioned controlling my medical decisions. Thursday arrived and I sat in the conference room between Megan and the principal while my parents walked in with their lawyer. Mom started crying immediately, saying I'd always been difficult and prone to exaggeration, while Dad kept repeating that Vanessa understood me better than anyone. They insisted the permission rule was just their way of preventing me from seeking unnecessary medical attention for minor issues. I waited until they finished their speech, then calmly explained how the rule started when I was 12 and listed specific times Vanessa had denied me medical care. The principal's face changed as I described waiting 6 hours with a broken finger because Vanessa was at a sleepover and couldn't be bothered to give permission. When I mentioned the time I had strep throat for 2 weeks because Vanessa said I was faking to get out of her choir concert, the principal started writing notes frantically. My parents' lawyer tried to interrupt, but the principal held up his hand and asked me to continue, so I told him about every single incident I could remember. Later that week, Gabriella called to tell me about her interview with Vanessa, who'd spent 2 hours insisting I'd been faking illnesses since we were little kids. Vanessa had given this whole timeline of supposed fake sick days and attention-seeking behaviors, but when Gabriella asked for specifics, most of the dates didn't match up with any school absences. Then Gabriella pulled out my medical records from when I was 12, showing I'd been hospitalized with severe pneumonia that had gone untreated for so long it caused permanent lung damage. Vanessa apparently went quiet when she saw the chest x-rays showing the scarring, then tried to claim she didn't remember that incident. The pediatric clinic faxed over 15 years of medical files the following Monday, and Dr. Keller spent his entire lunch break going through them with this increasingly worried expression. He found 7 different times I'd come in with serious conditions that had progressed way beyond normal because of delayed treatment. Each time matched up with something important in Vanessa's schedule like dance recitals, competitions, or social events. He showed me the pattern laid out on his desk, with sticky notes marking each incident and the corresponding delay in treatment. By Wednesday, Dr. Keller had written this 5-page medical opinion documenting how the pattern of denied care could have killed me multiple times over the years. He included copies of lung scans showing scarring from untreated respiratory infections and blood work showing how many times I'd fought off serious infections without proper antibiotics. His report stated that no child could fake the kind of physical evidence shown in my medical history, and the delays in treatment constituted clear medical neglect. That night, my phone buzzed with texts from both my parents saying if I didn't tell CPS I was exaggerating, they'd cut off my college fund and make sure I had nowhere to live when I turned 18. Dad's messages got increasingly angry, calling me ungrateful and saying I was destroying our family over teenage drama. I screenshot everything and immediately forwarded it all to Gabriella and to Ivy Serrano, the civil attorney Megan had connected me with earlier that week. The next morning, Ivy filed paperwork for an emergency protective order at the courthouse, explaining that this would work faster than waiting for criminal charges. She said the order would legally prevent my parents from interfering with my medical care or contacting me about the ongoing investigation, and since we had their threatening texts as evidence, the judge would likely approve it quickly. I sat at Jenny's kitchen table that weekend with a yellow legal pad and started writing down every single time I could remember being sick, and what happened. The first column had the date if I could remember it, the second had what was wrong with me, the third had what Vanessa was doing that day, and the fourth had whether I got help or not. After 3 hours, I had 4 pages filled with tiny writing, and the pattern was so obvious it made me sick to my stomach. Every school play, every dance competition, every important social event for Vanessa matched up with a time I couldn't get medical help. I remembered the time I had strep throat during her 8th grade graduation and had to sit through the whole ceremony with a fever of 103 because she said I was faking. The time I broke my wrist falling off my bike but couldn't go to the ER until the next day because Vanessa had a sleepover and didn't want the attention on me. Each incident got its own line on my timeline, and by the time I finished, I had documented 27 separate times over 4 years where Vanessa denied me medical care for actual injuries or illnesses. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Ted, and when I played it, his voice was shaky, but clear as he described everything he saw at the party. He talked about my blue lips, my fingernails turning purple, how I was gasping like a fish out of water, and most importantly, how my dad physically grabbed Jenny's arm to stop her from calling 911. Ted said he'd been recording video for Vanessa's birthday montage and caught some of it on his phone, including my dad saying they needed Vanessa's permission first. 3 days later, I was sitting in a courtroom with Ivy for the protective order hearing, and my parents walked in with some expensive-looking lawyer in a gray suit. He immediately started arguing that this was a private family matter that didn't belong in court, and that parents have the right to make medical decisions for their minor children. The judge, an older woman with reading glasses on a chain, looked at him over those glasses and asked if he was seriously arguing that one child should have medical authority over another child. The lawyer tried to explain it as a parenting choice, but the judge cut him off and asked my parents directly if they really made one daughter ask the other for permission to use an inhaler during an asthma attack. My mom started to explain how Vanessa knew me best, but the judge's face got harder with every word. After 40 minutes of arguments, the judge granted the protective order, but it wasn't as broad as Ivy wanted. I got full control over my own medical decisions without needing anyone's permission ever again, and my parents could only see me with supervision from CPS or another approved adult. The judge said she'd never heard of parents delegating medical decisions to a sibling and found it deeply concerning, but she couldn't grant the full no-contact order without more evidence of direct harm. That afternoon, I checked my phone and saw Vanessa's Instagram rant about how I'd ruined her entire future. The modeling scout had officially withdrawn their interest after hearing about what happened at her party, and she was blaming me for destroying her dreams with my attention-seeking dramatics. The comments were brutal, though, with kids from the school calling her out for letting me almost die, and I noticed several of her friends had unfollowed her, including 2 girls from her dance team. Later that week, Gabriella came by Jenny's house with a thick folder that contained CPS's preliminary report. I sat on the couch and read through 15 pages of interviews with witnesses from the party, medical professionals from the hospital, and school staff who'd noticed concerning patterns over the years. The report used words like severe medical neglect and failure to protect, and noted that neither of my parents showed any understanding of how dangerous their actions were. The investigator recommended continued CPS involvement with mandatory parenting classes and supervised visitation only. 2 days after that, I met with Reed Schwartz, the assistant DA, in his office downtown. He was younger than I expected, with thick black hair, and looked tired as he explained that while what my parents did was definitely criminal, proving they intended to kill me would be almost impossible. He said child endangerment charges were much more likely to stick since there was clear evidence they put me in danger by denying medical care. He asked me to write out a victim impact statement and said the case would probably take months to go through the system. That weekend, I found out my parents had filed a complaint with CPS, claiming Jenny's family was alienating me from them and poisoning me against my real family. The accusation made my hands shake with anger because Jenny's family literally saved my life, while my own parents stood there and watched me die. Jenny's mom hugged me when I started crying and said not to worry because they had all the documentation on their side. Sure enough, Ivy called me 5 days later to say the complaint had been dismissed already. The judge who reviewed it noted that CPS had placed me with Jenny's family for safety reasons based on medical evidence, not because of any manipulation or alienation. The judge also added a note that filing false complaints could result in criminal charges for harassment. The next week, I walked into Dr. Keller's office carrying my peak flow meter and the log I'd been keeping for the past month. I'd been recording my numbers 3 times a day just like he taught me, and the improvement was right there in black and white. My baseline had gone from 250 to 380, and I hadn't had a single serious attack since I'd been taking my maintenance inhaler every day without needing anyone's permission. Dr. Keller smiled when he saw the charts and said this was exactly what he expected to see when asthma was properly managed instead of being was ignored until it became an emergency. 3 days after that appointment, the school called me to their main office for the code of conduct hearing about Vanessa. I walked into the conference room and saw the principal sitting with 2 other administrators behind a long table. They had a thick folder open with typed reports and witness statements from kids who saw Vanessa grab me in the hallway last week. The principal asked me to describe what happened, and I told them how she cornered me after chemistry and grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. I showed them the photos Jenny took of the bruises that were still yellow and green on my forearm. They wrote everything down and asked if this was the first time she'd done something like this. I explained about the other times she'd followed me between classes or blocked my path to yell at me since I'd been staying with Jenny's family. The assistant principal pulled out more papers and said 3 teachers had reported seeing Vanessa approach me even after being told to stay away. They said they were taking this seriously because of the ongoing legal situation with my parents and would make a decision within 2 days. That night around 11, my phone buzzed with a voice message from Vanessa's number. I almost deleted it without listening, but something made me press play. Her voice was shaky and she was crying as she said she knew I was really sick at the party, but couldn't let me ruin her big moment with the modeling scout. She kept talking about how she panicked when she saw me turning blue and needed it to be fake, so she wouldn't feel guilty about wanting her party to be perfect. She said she never meant for me to actually die, but she couldn't admit she was wrong in front of everyone. My hands were shaking as I listened to her admit she knew I was dying, and chose to lie about it anyway. I immediately saved the message to 3 different places on my phone and my laptop. I forwarded copies to Ivy and Gabriella and Reed within minutes, because this changed everything. Vanessa had just confessed to knowingly denying me medical care during an emergency that almost killed me. The next morning, Dr. Keller called to say he'd finished writing his formal letter for the criminal case. He read parts of it to me over the phone, explaining how denying asthma medication during an acute attack was medical neglect that could cause death. He used specific medical terms about respiratory failure and cardiac arrest that made what happened sound as serious as it actually was. He said he'd already sent copies to Reed and would testify as an expert witness if needed. 2 days later, Reed called while I was doing homework at Jenny's kitchen table. He said they reviewed all the evidence, including Vanessa's voice message, and were moving forward with misdemeanor child endangerment charges against my parents. He explained that felony charges were unlikely because proving intent was too hard, but these charges still meant real consequences. He said my parents would have to appear in court and could face up to a year in jail, though that was unlikely for first-time offenders. He asked if I was okay with this level of accountability, and I said yes because it was better than nothing. The following week, I had to go to a CPS case conference at their office downtown. Gabriella was there with 2 supervisors, and they talked about next steps for my case. They suggested family therapy with continued supervision once the criminal case was over. I told them I didn't feel safe in therapy with people who hadn't admitted doing anything wrong. I explained how my parents still insisted they were just following house rules and didn't see the problem. The supervisors looked at each other and agreed to revisit therapy after the criminal case finished. They said my safety came first, and forcing therapy before my parents accepted responsibility could do more harm than good. Later that week, Megan called me into her office at the school to work on something she called an accommodations plan. She had forms spread across her desk that would guarantee I always had access to my medication at the school. We wrote down that I could leave any class if I had breathing problems without needing permission. She added that I could carry my inhaler at all times and use it whenever I needed without asking anyone first. She made sure no teacher could question or deny these accommodations no matter what. She filed copies with the nurse and every one of my teachers and gave me a card to carry that explained my rights. Ted texted me that weekend asking if we could talk about the criminal hearing. We met at a coffee shop near school and sat at a corner table. He said he wanted to testify about what he saw at the party, but didn't know if I wanted him involved. We had an awkward conversation about how Vanessa had manipulated him too, by lying about me being jealous and dramatic. He showed me texts where she'd convinced him I was faking being sick for attention over the years. We agreed he should focus on just the facts of what he witnessed at the party, like my blue lips, and my dad trying to stop Jenny from calling 911. The conversation was weird but necessary, and we both knew his testimony could help the case. A few days before the hearing, I met with Gabriella and Ivy at Ivy's office. I told them I wanted to testify at the criminal hearing, but not as a victim. I wanted to speak as someone telling the truth about what happened to me. They helped me practice what I would say without making me feel weak or broken. Gabriella reminded me to stick to facts, and Ivy showed me how to stay calm if the defense attorney tried to upset me. We went over my statement again and again until I could say it without crying. The next week during gym class, I felt that familiar tightness starting in my chest. Instead of panicking, I immediately used my inhaler and pulled out my peak flow meter. I blew into it and saw my numbers were dropping, but not dangerously low yet. I told the teacher I needed to sit out and monitor my breathing. I used my inhaler again after 5 minutes and kept checking my peak flow every few minutes. Within 15 minutes, my numbers were back up to safe levels and the tightness was gone. The gym teacher watched the whole thing and told me I handled it perfectly. She said she was impressed by how calm and prepared I was. I realized as I put my inhaler back in my pocket that I wasn't scared anymore because I finally had control over my own body and health. 3 days later, I was walking to my car after school when I saw my parents' SUV parked right next to Jenny's Honda. My stomach dropped as they got out and started walking toward me even though the protective order said they couldn't come within 50 feet. I pulled out my phone and dialed the compliance line number Ivy had made me save, telling them exactly where I was while my parents kept coming closer. Mom was crying, and Dad kept saying they just wanted to talk for 5 minutes, but I stayed on the phone and backed away toward the school entrance. Within 4 minutes, 2 security guards came running out and put themselves between me and my parents while one documented everything on his phone. Dad tried explaining they were my parents and had a right to see me, but the guard told him about the protective order on file with the school. They had to leave or campus police would arrest them for trespassing and violating a court order. The next morning, Vanessa found me at my locker and started screaming about how I destroyed her entire life and cost her the modeling contract she'd worked for since middle school. Students stopped to stare as she yelled that I was jealous and wanted to ruin everything good in her life just like I'd always done. I didn't say anything back, just held up my phone to record her while she kept screaming about how everyone at the school thought she was a monster now. When she finally stormed off, I went straight to the principal's office and showed him the video, explaining that Megan had taught me to document everything. He said this was the 3rd incident report about Vanessa this week, and called an emergency disciplinary hearing for that afternoon. The hearing lasted 2 hours with the principal, vice principal, and 3 teachers reviewing all the documented incidents plus witness statements from students who'd seen Vanessa corner me multiple times. They decided to suspend her from all extracurricular activities, including student council and debate team, and issued an official no-contact order that meant she couldn't approach me anywhere on the school property. If she violated it even once, she'd face immediate suspension and possible expulsion, which meant I finally had one place where I could feel safe from her. Reed called me that weekend to say he'd officially filed the misdemeanor child endangerment charges against my parents and needed me to prepare a victim impact statement for the court. I met with Ivy at her office downtown where we spent 3 hours writing and rewriting my statement until it focused only on facts without getting too emotional. We practiced me reading it out loud over and over, with Ivy timing me and helping me slow down when I started rushing through the hard parts. She taught me to pause and breathe between sections and look up at the judge instead of keeping my eyes on the paper the whole time. 2 weeks later, we all went to the courthouse for the arraignment where my parents would enter their plea. They stood at the defendant's table with their lawyer while the prosecutor read the charges about knowingly denying medical care to a minor in their custody. When the judge asked how they pleaded, they both said not guilty in voices that sounded smaller than I'd ever heard them. Vanessa sat in the gallery behind them, looking pale and younger than 16, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of her usual perfect curls. She kept staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time as an actual person, instead of just the twin who was supposed to stay in her shadow. The judge scheduled the trial for 6 weeks later and reminded my parents they still couldn't contact me except through lawyers. A month later, I stood at the podium in the courtroom reading my statement while my hands shook so bad I had to grip the edges to stay steady. I explained the permission rule in simple words, how it started when I was 12, and Vanessa decided I'd faked being sick at her recital. I described the day of the party, reading from my notes about not being able to breathe and my parents refusing to help even when I was turning blue. My voice cracked when I got to the part about dying for 4 minutes, but I kept going, getting stronger with each word until I was speaking clearly about what they'd done to me. The courtroom was completely silent except for my voice and Mom crying quietly at the defendant's table. After 3 days of testimony from Jenny, Ted, and several party guests, plus Dr. Keller's medical evidence about my scarred lungs from years of untreated infections, my parents' lawyer asked to meet with the prosecutor. They worked out a plea deal where my parents would plead guilty to a lesser charge in exchange for 18 months of mandated parenting classes and compliance monitoring instead of possible jail time. It wasn't the maximum punishment, but it meant they had to admit guilt, and it would stay on their criminal record forever, affecting any future jobs or housing applications. The judge approved the deal, but then added something extra, expanding my protective order to specifically state in legal language that Vanessa had zero authority over my medical decisions forever. The order said my health and medical care were my responsibility and right alone, and any attempt by family members to interfere would be considered a violation. 2 weeks after the trial ended, Gabriella came to Jenny's house for our final intensive meeting, where she said CPS was closing the active investigation phase. They were satisfied I was safe and thriving with Jenny's family, but would do periodic check-ins for the next year and had set up therapy referrals if I wanted them. She gave me a folder with all the case documentation and her direct number if I ever needed help again. That night at dinner, Jenny's parents said the emergency placement period was technically over, but they wanted me to know I was welcome to stay through the rest of the school year, and even through graduation if I wanted. Jenny's mom held my hand and said I'd become like a second daughter to them, and they couldn't imagine me leaving now. I said yes immediately because even though we weren't related by blood, they'd shown me more real family love in 3 months than my biological family had in 16 years. 3 months flew by faster than I expected, and suddenly I was sitting in Dr. Keller's office for my follow-up appointment, watching him pull up my test results on his computer screen. He pointed to the numbers showing my lung function had gone from 60% to almost 90%, just from taking my meds every day like I was supposed to. The improvement graphs looked like mountain slopes going up, and he printed them out for me to keep, while explaining how consistent treatment had reversed most of the damage from years of untreated attacks. He wrote prescriptions for 3 months of everything I needed, and made sure I had rescue inhalers for home, school, and Jenny's car. Plus he gave me extra spacers and showed me the proper cleaning schedule to prevent infections. The next day, Megan called me into her office at the school where she had boxes of folders and a label maker spread across her desk, ready to help me organize everything important. We spent 2 hours building what she called my safety file, putting medical records in one section, legal documents in another, emergency contacts in a third, with tabs for everything from insurance cards to therapy referrals. She photocopied my protective order 3 times so I could keep copies in different places, and helped me scan everything onto a flash drive as backup, while talking about college applications and how many survivors use their experiences in personal statements. We looked at scholarship opportunities for medical hardship cases, and she gave me pamphlets for schools with good support systems, for students with chronic health conditions, marking the ones with strong pre-med programs since I'd been thinking about that lately. Ted texted me that weekend asking if I wanted to grab lunch at the diner near school, just the 2 of us without any mention of Vanessa or the trial or anything heavy. We sat in a booth eating burgers and talked about normal stuff like his soccer season and my science project, setting clear boundaries that we wouldn't discuss my sister or what happened at the party. It wasn't the same easy friendship we had as kids building forts in my backyard, but it was honest and real, with him checking that I had my inhaler before we went anywhere, and me actually appreciating that he cared enough to ask. My phone buzzed during chemistry class with a text from Vanessa saying she knew she'd made some mistakes and maybe handled things wrong, though she didn't actually say sorry or admit to nearly killing me. I stared at the message for a long time, my finger hovering over the reply button, but then I deleted it without responding because protecting my peace mattered more than getting the last word, or trying to make her understand what she'd done. That night, I sat at Jenny's kitchen table with a notebook and wrote out a personal statement for my safety file, clearly stating in my own words that all medical decisions were mine alone to make. I listed every legal document that supported this, from the protective order to the CPS findings to the criminal case outcome, feeling the power of putting my medical autonomy in writing where no one could ever question it again. The statement took 3 pages and I made 5 copies, keeping 1 in my backpack, 1 in my locker, 1 in the safety file, 1 at the doctor's office, and 1 with Megan, making sure I'd never be without proof of my rights. Looking at my life 3 months after dying for 4 minutes, I had legal protection keeping my family away, stable housing with people who actually cared about me, proper medical care from doctors who listened and friends who prioritized my safety over anyone's feelings. The trauma wasn't erased and probably never would be completely, but I wasn't trapped anymore in a house where my twin decided if I lived or died based on her mood. Jenny's mom knocked on my door Saturday morning saying we were going shopping for medical supplies that were just mine, not shared or borrowed or hidden away where I couldn't reach them. We drove to 3 different stores finding the perfect peak flow meter in purple, my favorite color, plus a whole kit with extra inhalers, spacers, nebulizer masks, and a locked box to keep everything in, so I'd never have to ask permission to breathe again. She helped me set up a medical station in my room with everything labeled and organized, even buying a mini fridge for my liquid medications, saying over and over that these things were mine, and I should never have to beg for them. We got a medical alert bracelet engraved with my conditions and emergency contacts, plus a card from my wallet with my action plan that didn't mention needing anyone's approval, just my own judgment about my body. The freedom of having my own medical supplies felt bigger than anything else. Like I could finally trust that I'd always have what I needed to stay alive without depending on someone else's permission. My asthma was controlled for the first time since elementary school. I was safe with Jenny's family, who treated me like a real daughter, and I'd even started working on college applications with essays about overcoming medical neglect and finding my voice. Turns out when you can breathe freely without someone's hand around your throat, both literally with oxygen and figuratively with control, everything else becomes possible, including dreams I'd never let myself imagine before. This whole journey we've shared really hit me on a deeper level, and I'm honestly grateful you let me be here for it with you all. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.